Hi everyone, I'm Marie McLachlan and I never thought I'd end up making a video about the intersex gambit, but I am so sick to the back teeth of seeing it come up time and time again. And what really does my head in is that those who bring it up seem to think it's a real gotcha, as if we've never seen it before, that we're going to go, oh my god, so there are intersex people? That must mean that men who claim to be women are in fact women, right? What? The first thing I'm going to say is that, in spite of the title of this video, which is just a quote I've seen countless times on social media, I won't be using the term intersex unless I'm quoting someone else. Instead, I will use DSD, meaning differences of sexual development, originally disorders of sexual development, which appears to be the most widely used alternative at the moment, although I am increasingly seeing VSD, meaning variations of sexual development, and now I'm also seeing CCSD, meaning congenital conditions of sexual development. Many people who live with DSDs prefer any of these terms to the word intersex, which is misleading and gives rise to the totally false and offensive belief that people with these conditions aren't male or female, but something in between. And gender nutters try to use this falsehood in furtherance of their agenda of making everyone as stupid as they are. I have lost count of the number of tweets I've seen by people with one or other DSD saying, stop using us in furtherance of your agenda or your ideology. Now, I'm not saying that all people with DSDs would dissociate themselves from genderism. They are individuals like everyone else, and no one speaks for any other on that particular topic. And a tiny number are trans-identifying. But from having listened to people with a variety of DSDs, there does seem to be quite a lot of opposition to being used in this way and to being included in the LGBT whatever alphabet soup. Why is the intersex gambit so commonly used by genderists? It tends to come up when we say women are adult human females, men are adult human males, there are only two sexes and they are immutable. And they come back with, what about intersex people? You've heard of intersex people? Intersex people exist. Where do we put the intersex people? That one was about single-sex spaces. And before you know it, you have been diverted down a blind alley by people claiming that sex is a spectrum, blah, blah, blah. I recall dealing with that one in at least one previous video, but we'll revisit it again in a moment. There are about 40 conditions that fall under what this snippet from the UN Human Rights Office fact sheet calls the intersex umbrella. Intersex people are born with sex characteristics, including genitals, gonads, and chromosome patterns that do not fit typical male or female bodies. The term is used to describe a wide range of natural bodily variations. In some cases, traits are visible at birth, while in others, not apparent until puberty. Some chromosomal variations may not be physically apparent at all. Natural body variations. See anything in there about there being more than two sexes or sex being a spectrum? Oh, I must give honourable mention to our friend Andy Lewis of the excellent Quackometer blog, who coined the phrase the intersex gambit in the first place after seeing it repeatedly used by idiots who think the existence of intersex conditions means that sex is somehow a continuum. And he must have engaged with hundreds of these saddos on Twitter, and he very calmly corrects their misapprehensions, usually while being insulted in return. If you are on Twitter, I urge you to follow him. His Twitter handle is Le Canard Noir, and I have learnt from him as an exceptionally clear thinker for someone of a scientific background. I have also learnt from many tweeters who have DSDs, including all of these, and also Claire Graham, who is now banned from Twitter thanks to the cult, but who's written some good and very informative pieces on her website, mrkhvoice.com. That still, by the way, comes from a very good video by Zach Elliott of the Paradox Institute, which is called The Intersex Gambit. Zach has made a number of videos about different GSDs. There is loads of information out there, easily accessible, so there's really no excuse for the kind of ignorance displayed every single day on social media. I had a wealth of silly comments to choose from on social media to illustrate the arguments presented by the gender ideologues. Here is the first one I selected. What about intersex people? They should get to choose what sex they are based on their own knowledge of who they are, not someone else making the decision for them. Same with transgendered people, they know who they are. How can your sex, whether you are male or female, be who you are? How can a reproductive role, a function, whether it works perfectly or not, be an identity? Your sex isn't who you are, it is what you are. It is one fact about you, alongside other facts like your height and age, that you can't choose. There are some things about each of us that we can't change in reality. Now, in fairness, not everyone who is enthralled to gender ideology would say this. They would say their gender identity is who they are, and that isn't a choice, and that much is true. Actually, when they talk about what they call gender identity, they are talking about feelings. People can't help how they feel. Where we disagree is whether it is possible to feel like something you are not, something you have never actually been. I would contend that it isn't possible. I think this guy is confused, but what his comment reveals is that he thinks being intersex is somehow similar to being transgender, or more specifically that sex, which is material reality, is like gender, which is a social construct. As you probably know, some gender extremists call sex a social construct. No. That there are two evolved sexes defined by which of the two gametes they produce is not a social construct. That we reproduce as a species by the fusion of two gametes is, unlike gender stereotypes, something we can't change. We can't say, oh no, let's not do it that way. There must be other ways, let's book a stalk. We can say, oh no, women should be able to become plumbers and men should be able to stay at home and be homemakers without being seen as failures. Here is a poster who has posted a number of delightful and enlightening comments below one of my videos, and I'm saving one or two for a future video, but this one is relevant here. Intersex people prove sex is on a spectrum, it isn't a binary. And this one I include for entertainment value. I had said to him he won't find a peer-reviewed biology paper describing sex as a spectrum, and of course he didn't, because no such paper exists, because sex isn't a spectrum. I found plenty of biologists describing basic biology. Now it's up to you to disprove the entire spectrum of humanity, boil it down into two categories, and publish a paper. Unfortunately, biology seems to disagree with you. I'm sure Black River is a young man. Sorry, any young men watching, but I found this arrogant and dishonest comment fascinating. Here is someone who clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, but instead of having the humility to act accordingly and back down, he decides to try and blag it on the assumption that I know even less. Definitely a man anyway, and it's not surprising he's anonymous. Of course, there are some biologists and doctors who have zero integrity and might go, or pretend to go, along with crap like this. Scientists are no less likely to fall prey to ideological capture than anyone else. At the end of the day, they are all men's rights activists. However, biology, as he puts it, doesn't disagree with me. What's he say again? It's up to you to disprove the entire spectrum of humanity, boil it down into two categories and publish a paper. Note the tone of incredulity here. You're saying everybody only has a mother and father that produce them? There are only two gametes? Prove it! Publish a paper. I could win a Nobel Prize, right? No, I don't have to publish a paper because the fact of how we reproduce is already known and published. Here, for example, is a biology paper, which again I thank Andy Lewis for digging out, that explains how the two, just two, no more, sexes evolved. I'll link below. But of course, this Black River guy doesn't know or understand or accept that sex is defined by function. So let's deal with the tiresome nonsense about sex being a spectrum. The spectrum of what exactly? What is the defining numerical parameter that determines where each of us is positioned on the range? It's cobblers. But as an ignoramus, he has perhaps more excuse than do some journals for publishing misleading opinion pieces. One of the worst examples is this infographic published in Scientific American some years ago, which is still being widely shared on social media in spite of it being incredibly dishonest. The phrase artistic license doesn't cover it. Obviously, the term spectrum here is being used metaphorically, not scientifically. And it is okay to do that when you're talking about non-scientific subjects like politics. The political spectrum is probably the most common one. I even use it on my site. But there is no sex spectrum. What this person has done is take, 8 DSDs and plotted those that affect males on one side and those that affect female on the other, and they've decided on fairly random criteria which are closest to typical male and typical female development and which are furthest away, in order to give the impression of a range. But a range of what? Sex is binary, sperm over male, female. By the way, one of the things they love to say is how biology is so complex. Yes, it is complex and sometimes things go wrong, disorders of the reproductive tract happen, but as Andy points out here, there are still 2 sexes. These facts don't contradict each other. One more article worth mentioning because it's also widely shared and just as misleading. Sex Redefined, written by Claire Ainsworth and originally published in Nature magazine in 2015. Links to this article have been tweeted thousands of times, and I'd wager that a large proportion of those who tweeted them haven't actually read it, or if they have read it, they haven't understood it, but hey, who cares? What it says in the Stand First, which, to be fair, may not have been written by Ainsworth herself, is enough to satisfy the gender ideologues. The idea of 2 sexes is simplistic. It is ridiculously misleading and gives people the idea that there are indeed more than 2 sexes, when what the article is actually about is DSDs, and she does not say those who have them are different sexes. She doesn't say there is a 3rd, 4th, 5th sex. In fact, on the Nature website accompanying the article is a podcast interview with Claire Ainsworth in which she says this.
Within male and female, however, there is a much greater variation than people used to think, and that's what scientists are finding out right now.
And if that isn't enough, on Twitter somebody asked Claire Ainsworth, in your piece Sex Redefined, are you making the claim that there are more than 2 sexes? To which she replies, no, not at all. 2 sexes with a continuum of variation in anatomy/physiology. And quite a few people responded along the lines of this tweeter. Unfortunately, your article is being used to spread misinformation, basically that sex is a spectrum. As a doctor, I find this especially concerning, as people need to acknowledge their sex for us to provide appropriate medicine. The lovely Tricia Frasman simply said, thank you very much for the clarification. I love her. She's so polite and so different from me. The reason I'm highlighting her response is because she wrote an excellent critique of Claire's article, and I urge anyone who has read Claire's article to read Tricia's response. I'll link to it below. Another comment. Like bitch. There aren't even only 2 sexes, let alone genders. What about intersex people? 5 question marks suggests that he really, really wants to know, but not quite enough to do the research himself. This sounds like another person who's been misled by the word intersex. This tweet was quote tweeted by someone who adds some detail to the misinformation. Facts. Most people don't know this, but there are 6 common biological sexes, X, XX, XY, XXY, etc., etc. Of course, Most people don't know that because it's not true, and yet this nonsense keeps getting repeated. Those are not biological sexes. Obviously, all those X's and Y's are intended to represent sex chromosomes. If we know nothing else, at least we all surely know that there are two sex-determining chromosomes, X and Y, and that most of us have one pair, either XX or XY, in every cell. While women typically have a pair of XX chromosomes, about 1 in 2,000 female babies are born with one X chromosome missing or partially missing. Note the word female. That is the name of the biological sex that someone with one X chromosome belongs to. She's not another sex, and she's not in between two sexes. She is female, and she has a DSD called Turner syndrome, which can cause a range of symptoms, some mild, some very serious. Someone with an XXY chromosome pattern is male. While males typically have one X and one Y chromosome, those born with an extra X chromosome have a DSD called Klinefelter syndrome. XXXY is a male, XYY is a male. These are not the only non-standard karyotypes, but the main point here is that they are not sexes. The sexes are male and female, not XX, XY, or any other combination. So, once again, DSDs cause anatomical variations to people who have followed one of the two developmental pathways, either towards the production of sperm or towards the production of ova. Just like everyone else, they are either male or female, and in most cases unambiguously so. I'm going to end with this amusing exchange I once saw on Twitter. There aren't only two sexes. This is a perfect example of what is widely believed but untrue. Developmental biologist Emma Hilton replies, "Name the third sex." And she gets this facetious response, "If you like, Brian." I like it. And she comes back with, "And how does Brian create a zygote? What cellular components does Brian carry, and which gamete does it fuse with to kick the whole circle of life off again?" Answer came there none. What can one say but thanks for watching. Bye.